Hi, how's it going? Hello, everyone. I've been seeing Minolta brand camcorders and cameras pop up on Amazon, and recently they showed up on a site of a major camera gear retailer. Once I saw that, I did some quick research, and I found that the rights to the Minolta name were purchased by a company called Elite Brands, who started releasing cameras under the Minolta name. The reason I started looking into them in the first place is that I recognized the cameras themselves. They were clearly the same as Ordro cameras. They all looked identical to various Ordro models, right down to the included accessories with identical specs. After a little more searching, I found a website where, with a minimum order of 1,000 units, you can get an Ordro camera branded however you want. You can have your choice of branding put on the camera, on the packaging, and even have a custom graphic displayed on the startup screen of the camera. And what do you know? These Minolta cameras say Minolta on the camera, where it says you could put the logo in the ad. They say Minolta on the otherwise very generic looking box they come in, and the little splash screen when you power one up says Minolta. You aren't fooling me, Elite Brands. These are Ordro cameras. I've tested enough Ordro cameras that I pretty much know what to expect from these cameras, but rather than just sit on my assumptions, I decided to get a couple of them to check out. So here today I have the 25NV and the 100Z. The 25NV is relatively cheap for a camcorder, but the 100Z is actually $70 more expensive than a Sony CX405. So let's check these cameras out and see what you're getting for your money, besides the fact that you're getting an Ordro camera, which we've already established. Right off the bat, there were quality issues. The more expensive 100Z has a stuck pixel. There's a bright dot visible on the screen, and it shows up in the recordings as well, so it is a problem with the sensor, not the display. Both cameras include generic no-name SD cards, and one of them failed almost immediately. I took a few pictures with it, and it worked, and the pictures were there. Then I tried to record a video. It recorded for a couple of seconds, then stopped with no warning and no indication why it stopped. I tried to start recording again, and I got a memory error. That card never worked again. It just causes errors in whatever device I try. But that's just an accessory, so it's not a huge deal. And speaking of memory cards, neither of these cameras work with anything larger than a 32 gigabyte SD card. They're not compatible with SDXC cards, so 32 gigs is the limit. I did try a 64 gigabyte card in both cameras, and it didn't work in either. The 25NV also locked up a couple times when attempting to access playback mode. And while not technically a quality issue per se, based on the weight, I would guess that these cameras have blocks of metal in them in order to make them feel like they're higher quality than they are. And if you think that's just a baseless assumption, watch some of my Ordro camera reviews where I take the cameras apart and find blocks of cast iron in them. Both cameras have touchscreens, but they aren't very responsive or accurate. They often require multiple taps to get any response, and in the menu of the 25NV in particular, I often opened the wrong option and had to go back because it just wasn't very accurate. The touchscreens do work, but both are frustrating at times. Both cameras claim 4K Ultra HD resolution. They claim it in the ads, the spec sheet, and all over the cameras. But both also have 2880 by 2160 resolution printed right on them. That is a very typical resolution for Ordro cameras, which claim to be 4K. It is actually a 4:3 ratio, not 16:9, and it's not the 3840 by 2160 resolution that 4K Ultra HD should be. The cameras embed the text 3840 by 2160 in the file metadata, but that's simply not accurate, and it feels like intentional deception. The actual output resolution of the video from both of these cameras is 2880 by 2160. Now, that doesn't mean it's not interpolated up from something even lower, but the output resolution is 2880 by 2160. It even imports into DaVinci Resolve in a 4:3 format, which I then have to stretch out. Resolution isn't everything when it comes to image quality, and quite frankly, I think decent 1080p is enough a lot of the time. But these cameras do claim to be 4K, and they're not. The 25NV claims to have image stabilization, which it calls anti-shake, and it only shows up in photo mode, but a lot of times with these types of cameras, settings that only show up in photo mode do work in both modes, so I did try it in both modes. And whether anti-shake was on or off, it made no difference in either mode. This is unfortunately par for the course for Ordro. Many of their camcorders claim to have an anti-shake feature, and I've yet to test one where it worked. So neither of these cameras have image stabilization of any kind in either mode. And both have very noticeable rolling shutter, so neither of these cameras do very well handheld. The hand strap on both is a bit flimsy, and it's positioned in such a way that it's not very ergonomic. The rounded side of the 100Z in particular, with the camera strap mounted right at the bottom, it just doesn't work out very well. Both cameras included what looks like a mini USB cable. Mini USB is uncommon these days, with micro USB being far more common, and even that is slowly being phased out in favor of USB-C. But strangely, the two cables are actually different and are not interchangeable between the two cameras. It turns out one of them is not a standard mini USB, and it will not plug into the other camera. I ran into a similar situation with an Ordro camera once before. It had a unique connector type, and I lost the included cable, rendering that camera unusable because I couldn't find a compatible replacement, and I couldn't find any other way to charge the included battery. Speaking of the battery, the gauge on both cameras jumps around a lot. They will often drop a bar or two when you start recording, or turn on the LED, or switch to IR mode, or even when doing something as simple as zooming in. Then when you stop recording or turn the LED off, or even sometimes just randomly, the battery gauge will jump back up. The gauges are better than nothing, but they aren't tuned very well and can be misleading at times. In terms of battery life, I haven't done a rundown test with either of these two particular cameras, but I've tested a lot of cameras very similar to these, and just the battery life in my testing didn't seem any different than those, and in general you get about an hour. As for audio, neither of these are the worst Ordros, but they both have serious issues. They both have a 3.5mm audio input jack, which is nice, and it's a good feature for the price of these cameras, but the quality is very limited. The 25NV does not supply plug-in power through the jack, so it will not work with passive microphones. So if you wanted to just use it with a standard lavalier microphone, or something like a Rode Video Micro or something like that, that's just a passive, non-powered microphone, that it will not work with this camera. Both cameras seem to have a limited frequency response as well. The 100Z has a strong digital noise reduction applied that can cause artifacts and an unnatural sound at times. In situations with a lot of ambient sound, it can lead to some really strange whooshing audio. The 25NV has audio that continuously ramps up and down in volume, resulting in a very uneven sound that goes from too quiet to literally clipping. This Sennheiser MKE600 can be powered with an AA battery internally, and when connected to either of these cameras at about 1 foot away with a normal speaking volume, the audio clips terribly with both of these cameras. At about 2 feet away, the 25NV no longer clips with a normal speaking voice most of the time, but as the audio ramps up and down, it still clips sometimes. And even at 2 feet away, the audio still clips terribly with the 100Z. All right, so now I'm recording with the 100AZ. I'm about 2 feet from the camera. I have a Sennheiser MKE shotgun microphone powered by a AA battery plugged into the camera. Like I said, I'm standing about 2 feet from it. And this is how the audio sounds with what I would say is a pretty high quality external microphone recording into the camera with me standing about 2 feet away from the microphone, and on a day that kind of cold and cloudy, but little bits of sun here and there. So this is how it sounds, and that's how it looks in probably a situation that's about as good as it can get, because it's not a very high contrast scene. And now I'm recording with the 25NV. Same situation, sitting on the same tripod, same Sennheiser MKE600 microphone connected to it, powered by a AA battery, connected into the external microphone jack of this camera, still standing about 2 feet away behind the camera. Microphone is pointed back at me. This is how the audio sounds. There is a small amount of distant traffic noise running across that bridge there. Just a tiny bit of a breeze, but I do have a frame wind muff on the microphone, and honestly, the audio, it's pretty quiet right here. It's not a bad situation for audio. Like I said, about 2 feet away from the camera. All right. And just as a point of comparison, I'm now recording with the Sennheiser MKE600 into a different camera that has a microphone input jack, just to kind of show what this microphone would sound like with a decent microphone input in essentially the exact same scenario, same situation, standing about the same distance from the microphone, about 2 feet. Sennheiser MKE600, powered by the internal AA battery, recording into a 3.5mm microphone input jack on a camera. So this is how that microphone would sound in the exact same scenario, connected to a different camera. And in fact, just a standard lavalier microphone plugged into the 100Z and clipped to my shirt where I would normally clip a lavalier microphone, the audio clips horribly and is essentially unusable. It's just way too loud. Neither camera has adjustable audio levels, and neither can display the audio level on the screen, so you'll never know if it's too quiet or if it's clipping until after the fact. So despite having an audio input jack, the options are still pretty limited due to having no way to monitor or adjust the audio levels, no plug-in power on the 25NV, and quality issues with both. Both of these cameras have a fairly similar field of view at the widest end. I estimate they have a roughly 40 to 45 millimeter equivalent field of view. They're not the widest angle lenses. The 25NV has a fixed lens with fixed focus, no optical zoom, and a 2 to 3 foot minimum focus distance. It claims to have 16x digital zoom, but that claim is simply not true. I would guess it's closer to 4x. And honestly, the quality drops so much even at that I don't see a 16x being really useful anyway. The 100Z has 10x optical zoom, but you would really want to have a tripod or something for this because there's no stabilization of any kind, and the rolling shutter just looks even worse the more you zoom in. It just gets amplified along with everything else. The 100Z also has autofocus, but I almost feel like I should put quotes around the word autofocus. In good light, when not zoomed in, it can be okay, but it still just kind of pulses once in a while whenever it thinks it needs to reacquire focus. It doesn't quite seem like continuous autofocus should be. But the real problem is that there are times when it will either continuously hunt or simply miss focus and stop trying. It gets worse in low light and when zoomed in, and if you combine low light with zoom, then the autofocus is just sometimes pretty terrible. When you zoom in or out, it will make a focus attempt when you stop. And I occasionally found myself zooming in and out slightly over and over, hoping it would land on sharp focus. There's also no way to manually focus or to simply lock the focus, so you're always at the mercy of whatever it decides to do. Honestly, as far as these cheap cameras go, auto white balance in here with this camera is probably the best I've seen with these types of cameras. Not bad. It does start to hunt continuously once in a while. Nope. Now it just kind of missed and isn't trying again. See that everything's a little bit out of focus. Move it around a little. Will it try again? It's pulsing continuously now. Oh, it stopped. Okay, so yeah, it's working-ish. Image quality often is not the worst problem with these types of cameras, and you can pretty much make an interesting video with any camera. But the question is whether or not it's good enough when you also consider the other limitations of these cameras. As mentioned before, the rolling shutter combined with a lack of image stabilization means that handheld footage is tough with either of these cameras, and they also have high amounts of digital sharpening and contrast, which can lead to an impression of detail at first glance, but also leads to sharpening artifacts and other issues. In terms of detail, these cameras are mighty proud of their 4K claim, and it's a claim that they just do not back up with results. The 100Z looks like 720p. The super high sharpening, the noise reduction, and contrast boost helps it appear detailed at times, but in terms of actual resolving power, it's nowhere near a decent 1080p camera. And when it comes to resolving black and white text and lines across a resolution chart, the 25NV actually does a lot better than the 100Z. In fact, I'd say the actual resolution of this camera might even be over 1080p. But again, those results are only when it comes to high contrast, black and white detail, such as text on a resolution chart. But on typical real-world detail, both do very poor, with the 25NV actually falling well behind even the 100Z. Both have such high noise reduction and compression that fine details are simply smeared away. A Sony CX405 doesn't have as much resolution on the chart as the 25NV, but there is noticeably more detail retained in the rest of the image. When it comes to overall image quality, resolution certainly isn't everything, but unfortunately these cameras are poor all around. Color accuracy isn't good. Auto white balance is usually the best option, but it tends cold and magenta. The 25NV is especially inconsistent when it comes to color. The color on the 100Z actually isn't too bad at times, with really the main issue just being that highly boosted contrast, just making the colors look a little bit garish at times. The other white balance modes, other than auto, occasionally will give more pleasing color in certain situations, but none of the modes ever provide especially accurate color. These cameras also have poor dynamic range. That isn't really surprising or uncommon with small sensor cameras, but these cameras have boosted contrast, which just makes the problem worse. Both auto-expose dark, totally crushing the shadows and resulting in a dark image overall. And if you turn the exposure up on either, you completely lose the highlights. The crazy boosted contrast, along with the high noise reduction and high sharpening, tends to make things look punchy but a bit cartoonish, with large blocks of sharply contrasting colors that are smooth and lack texture. Although at least the high noise reduction means that they aren't super noisy. Both cameras max out at 400 ISO, so anything other than mildly low light means a totally dark image. A Sony CX405, which remember is $70 less than the 100Z, has a noisy but far more usable image in low light. On the flip side, the 25NV has infrared mode. However, even in IR mode, the only reason you can see anything in even remotely dark situations is because of the built-in IR light. Unfortunately, the IR light is so weak that it's really only helpful in a small space. It doesn't light a large room very well, and outside it's basically useless. I can see much better with the naked eye than I can with this camera in IR mode. The only exception to that might be in a small, totally dark room where the IR light would allow the camera to see a little bit, but the detail, dynamic range, and field of view are so low that the monsters will surely get you before you can tell what's happening. In the end, these cameras do record video, but with all the same limitations and problems that Ordro cameras have. They have the same bottom-of-the-barrel features, image quality, and build quality. Which makes sense. These are Ordro cameras with a fake ID that says Minolta. That doesn't mean you can't use them, and some of them are relatively inexpensive, like the 25NV, but I still maintain that they are not a good value for what you actually get. And regardless of performance, what personally bothers me the most are the false claims. So if you watch this video and decide, yep, that's the camera for me, that's fine, but hopefully at least this video gave you some idea of what to expect. So hopefully it was helpful, and if you have any questions, let me know. As always, thanks for watching. Take care.